Hi class, good morning! For today, pag-uusapan natin ang cost accounting. But I'd like to let you know that this topic is divided into two major subsets. For this lecture, we are to talk about the introduction of cost accounting, its relevance, the classification of cost, and at the same time, the flow of inventory in a manufacturing type of business. Pag-uusapan din natin, of course, ang job order and process costing, and included din yung discussion about normal and abnormal production losses. On the second subset, we are to talk about the costing for joint products and byproducts. Without further ado, let us start today's discussion with a prayer. So this song is actually requested by one of your co-reviewees. Let us say in the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. Life is not at all that bad, my friend. Mm. If you believe in yourself, if you believe there's someone who walks through life with you, you'll never be alone. Just learn to reach out and open your heart. Lift up your hands to God, and He'll show you the way. And He said, cast your burdens upon me, those who are heavily laden. Come to me, all of you who are tired of carrying heavy loads. For the yoke I will give you is easy, and my burden is light. Come to me, and I will give you rest. Ayan, no? For everyone who is struggling right now with the preparation for board exam, ipagpasa Diyos nyo ang lahat and believe that your efforts will be compensated so soon. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay. Yan. Setup muna natin. Let me lay to you our learning objectives for today's discussion. Unang-una, we aim to understand the significance of cost accounting both for financial reporting and business strategizing. So just an overview, cost accounting is actually a meeting point between financial accounting and at the same time management advisory services. But later on, I'll get to have that expounded. Number two, we also aim to understand how job order and process costing works. Anong klase ng industry or kind of production does it apply? And what are the particular procedures that we need to understand to perform the proper costing? Ayan. So we have here a query. And of course, our favorite na tagapagtanong, we have Mr. Bin asking, what is cost accounting and how has it become so significant? So ito, this is actually a definition that you can immediately find sa internet. Sinasabi that cost accounting is the reporting and analysis of a company's cost structure. Highlighted terms, reporting, and analysis. So you cannot contain this with reporting alone. What you show in your balance sheet as well as your income statement as inventory or cost of sales. But it's also a tool that you use in analyzing your cost structure. Anong level ng materials yung nagamit mo for production, labor, and at the same time, overhead. In fact, cost accounting is not just concentrated on that idea because it is even applied sa standard costing and also with other aspects like CDP analysis, nagagamit talaga yung idea mo about costing. Now, let me continue. Sinasabi din dito that plainly, cost accounting is a process of assigning cost to cost objects. So ano yung cost objects? These are your outputs of production. Pero ang tanong, lahat ba ng cost ina-assign mo doon? Of course, we are to answer that with the furtherance of our discussion because hindi naman lahat ng cost ay capitalizable or inventoriable. Meron ding mga cost that you expense outright. Depende sa nature and how does it relate to your operation in a normal course of business. So in whatever industry you are, whether nasa service, nasa merchandising, or nasa manufacturing, cost accounting is a very significant tool. So let me continue. Sinasabi dito that cost accounting is an integration of financial accounting and management accounting. So how does it happen? Come to think that with your cost data, with how you are able to assign cost to cost objects, you also know how much is the cost of your inventory and how much is your cost of sales. Pag alam mo yun, that's easily translated in your financial statements. And at the same time, that's also used as a component in the calculation of taxable income which you report sa Bureau of Internal Revenue. Though naman sa side ni management accounting, your cost data is very important in business strategizing in such a case that you get to analyze whether a particular line of product is profitable or not. Also for some businesses, depende kasi yung pricing sa market, no? It may be based on your cost or it may be based or dictated by your demand. Now, pag yung price mo is dictated by your cost, then it's so important that you have your cost data and that will be the base for your markup. Ayun. Also, it's a way to understand whether your cost structure is too much of labor intensive or capital intensive. And by that, you get to strategize what is a good integration between that two mix of conversion costs. So yun. Now, along the way, we get to meet different classification of costs. It could be classified as whether fixed or variable, as whether relevant or sunk cost, minsan out-of-pocket cost. But for this lecture, I'd like to highlight classification of cost in terms of whether it's inventoriable or a period cost. Una-una, whenever we meet the term inventoriable cost, this pertain to manufacturing costs. So these are your inputs of production if you are in the manufacturing industry. Or maybe your mismo merchandise inventory kung nasa merchandising industry ka naman. So the cost is directly attributable to your items. Whereas, kung na-meet mo naman yung term na period cost, that basically pertains to non-manufacturing costs. So, kumbaga, they are not directly related to your level of production. So, sample of your period costs are, general and administrative expenses, selling expenses, yung mga ganun. So, they are incurred not necessarily dependent on your level of production. Kasi pag dependent yan to your level of production and directly traceable to your production process, then it will not be reported as period cost, but as part, most probably, of your factory overhead. Ayan. So let me continue. Ayan. On your manufacturing costs, we actually have major classifications such as direct materials, direct labor, and production overhead. Please always bear in mind these three groups of costs because ito yung bubuo ng iyong manufacturing costs. So later, you will get to appreciate it more. So pag sinabi nating direct materials, ito yung materials that are immediately or directly traceable to your finished goods. Kumbaga, kita mo siya sa finished good. Like for example, you are in the business of, doing furniture. So yung wood na ginamit dyan, that's direct material. If you are also in the business of manufacturing footwears, then yung rubber mismo at saka yung tela na ginamit dyan, yun yung mga direct materials. But I'd like to note that there are also some materials which are directly seen or traceable to your final output, but because of its nature na napaka-insignificant ng cost niya, konti-konti lang, and it's also impractical to exert efforts to, identify or allocate them specifically. So they don't actually they are no longer treated as direct materials but are considered as indirect. So if yung materials ay classified na as indirect, then it will no longer be part of this cost group, but it will automatically be part of your production overhead. Ano yung sample dyan? Yun, balik tayo sa furniture business. If you have incurred cost for your nails, for pakonti-konting rubbers or glue, yun, very immaterial yung cost niya. So instead that they're costed specific to each unit of production, then they're charged to production overhead. So yun yung mga basic examples. Now, we also have another group of costs which we call as direct labor. So kasi nga direct, just like direct material, yung labor na yan ay directly attributed to the production of finished goods. So for example, ulit, in the furniture business, yung labor cost for your carpenter, for the one also who carves the design, the effort is directly related to the production of your final product. So, yun, that's direct labor. Tapos, for example, then you are into construction business. So, yung cost also for the pinapasahod mo sa mga mason, yun, direct labor din yun. Yes, sir. Paano naman yung mga supervisory and managerial cost of labor mo? Kasi nga, yung connection niya is indirect. Hindi naman si supervisor and si manager yung mismong pumupukpok or nagka-carve out. So, yung treatment mo sa labor na yun ay indirect. So, it does not fall as direct labor but is charged as production overhead or factory overhead. So pag nag-mix yung direct labor plus direct materials, yun yung tinatawag na prime cost. Pag pinaghalo mo naman si direct labor at saka si production overhead, ang tawag naman sa kanya ay conversion cost. But talking about overhead, actually, it's like a catching basin. Kumbaga, it's, what you cannot classify as direct material or direct labor, you put that under production overhead. Basta make sure lang na yung cost na yun ay related pa din sa production in your normal course of business. So dito na papasok si indirect materials tapos si indirect labor. Also, yung mga costs mo sa planta like, depreciation of your plant machinery and equipment, yung renta mo sa iyong planta, cost mo sa iyong utilities, mga insurance mo, yun. Yun yung papasok sa overhead. Ayan. So just don't forget these three, and for sure you will be able to get familiarized with the overall calculation. So ito, pag-usapan natin yung inventory flow. Actually, sa manufacturing industry, meron tayong tatlong klase ng inventories. Unang-una si raw materials inventory, then we also have work in process inventory, tapos meron din tayong finished goods inventory. So whenever we meet raw materials inventory, yung kasali dyan ay both si direct and indirect materials. Okay. You know what, guys? I'm actually showing here T accounts because ako, as someone na nagsusolve, I get to picture out more the concept if naka T account siya because I get to trace the flow of transaction. Like, from raw material, papasok siya to work in process, from work in process, papasok siya sa finished goods, tapos, and so on to your cost of goods sold. So in here with your raw materials inventory, with your beginning balance, that is actually increased with your net cost of purchases. So, with your net cost of purchases, you include your freight in, tapos ibawas mo na rin yung mga purchase discounts na na-avail mo. Ayan. Tapos, with your materials issued, so kasi nga, dalawang materials to, direct and indirect, both yan papasok sa iyong work in process inventory. So, kumbaga, you put that into production. However, si direct materials, automatic sa direct materials din siya na line papasok. Whereas si indirect materials, doon siya papasok sa component ng factory overhead. And there, you have your ending balance. I'd like you to familiarize this because nga, kung minsan yung question ay tinatanong yung mga figures sa gitna or you have to work back for the beginning balance. At least when you are so familiar with the structure, then it would be very, very easy for you to do the work back procedure. Ayan. So once released, you are already good for production, then we get to deal with the work in process inventory or WIP. So normally we also have our beginning balance. Then you add for a certain period the direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. You know what, guys? Si factory overhead, you'll get to encounter factory overhead applied, tapos si factory overhead control. So ito na lang para mas maging madali. What you actually include here is the factory overhead applied. You know what? Kung minsan kasi, huli na napafinalize kung magkano ba talaga yung actual overhead mo. So yun yung ipapasok mo sa factory overhead control. But upon doing the production by estimating the cost, since hindi pa nga siya available, then most companies apply overhead, like for example, on a certain percentage of your direct labor or on another matrix, like for example, a certain rate based on specific machine hours. So yung ganun. So yung pumapasok muna dito is yung applied overhead. So with what you're able to complete na items for the period, then ito rin yung goods completed na matatanggal from your work in process inventory and matatransfer to your finished goods inventory. And there you have your ending balance. With your finished goods inventory, papasok nga dito yung mga natapos na inventaryo for a certain period. But this is also decreased with the goods sold. So it is at the point na naibenta mo na yung inventory mo that your inventoriable cost is translated into period cost and reported as cost of sales or cost of goods sold depende sa gamit na terminology ng business mo. Balikan natin ulit si factory overhead. Sir, paano if yung factory overhead applied and control mo ay hindi equal? So meaning to say, you could have incurred over-applied overhead or under-applied overhead. Pag silent naman, that would also mean that your over or under application is immaterial, then you just have that adjusted to your cost of goods sold for the period. So meaning to say, kung over applied ka, napasobra ka ng cost, so you deduct that to your cost of goods sold. If under applied ka naman, nagkulang ka sa cost mo, then you also add that in reverse to your cost of goods sold. So ganun yung mangyayari. However, class, if yung over or under application ng overhead mo ay material, normally sinasabi naman yan sa problem if it's material, you are to allocate that to your cost of goods sold, finished goods inventory, and work in process inventory by the proportion of their ending balances. So you cannot lump everything to your cost of goods sold if material yung difference. Ayan. So, ito na pala. Make sure that you have your hand out. Actually, nasa phone ko siya. Let's have discussion question number 1. Ito. Which of the statements below does not rightfully describe cost accounting? So, kung mga theory questions class, please really make sure to read each of the choices. You cannot neglect this because in the actual board exam, whether the question is theory or a problem, that won't matter. It's the same one check per item. And kung minsan pa nga, even ako, I really admit that mas nagkakamali ako sa theory question than in problem solving. Kasi, di ba, with theory questions, minsan nakakalito yung answer nga kung minsan parang tama lahat ng sagot. Okay. But ito, let's take a deal with item number 1. Choice letter A, ito. Cost accounting is a powerful tool both in financial reporting and business strategizing. Yes, it's true. So, tama yan. Letter B, cost accounting is used in assigning cost to cost objects. Tama rin yan. I've got to mention that in my prior discussion. Ito, letter C, it is imperative, so kinakailangan daw, that an entity invests into a sophisticated, yung maganda daw na cost accounting system to ensure accuracy in cost calculation. So ito, dito papasok yung concept ng management advisory services. It is not at all times that you buy a system, sophisticated system to ensure accuracy because, you know, for every cost incurred, for every investment that you have to consider, benefiting from that the benefit is justifiable or will justify the cost of acquiring that sophisticated cost accounting system. So with this, it is very obvious that for number 1, ang mali na description for cost accounting is letter C. So it's not imperative. It would still be based on sound management system with the concept of cost and benefit. So yung sagot for number 1 is letter C. Now with letter D, tama din siya. Tama siya that cost data is relevant in evaluating how manufacturing process lines are engineered. Kasi nga kung minsan, lalong-lalo na with the concept of business process re-engineering, you really get to check the layout of your production lines. Paano ba naidudugtong ang one process to another? You also check bottlenecks. And, with your cost data, malalaman mo kung saang point nagkakaroon ng inefficiency. And that's gonna be a starting point for you to recalibrate your production layout. So, it's really, really powerful that you have your cost data. So, ayun, the answer for discussion question number 1 is obviously letter C. Okay, ayan, let's proceed with question number 2. Identifying whether a cost is direct or indirect would depend on, ito, hindi siya magmamatter whether it's variable or fixed. Hindi na siya magmamatter whether it's controllable or not. Hindi na siya magmamatter if it's relevant or sunk. But it would matter on traceability. So yung sagot din with number 2 is letter C, traceability. So what you can directly trace to final output, whether as materials or labor in terms of efforts expended, then yun yung magiging direct. Residual to that is considered indirect and is accounted as part of your production overhead cost. So, yun lang. Actually, kung minsan kasi, with the terminologies lead, nakakalito. So, wag lang kayo malito. Always get back to the concept and understand what would really direct or dictate your costing mechanism. Yan, let me proceed. Ito, napakadali. So whenever you meet indirect materials as to classification, alam mo na that it's part of your overhead cost. But kasi nga, wala dito yung overhead cost, then it could either be prime cost or conversion cost. But as I mentioned earlier, overhead plus direct labor, that would fall as your conversion cost. So in this case, yung sagot ay letter D. Indirect materials are reported as conversion costs. But let me just have a short discussion on some items. Kasi you would also meet the term sunk costs. So sunk costs are costs which are already expended and would not be differential in your future decisions. Like for example, depreciation. Whenever you already invested in the past, for example, the construction of a facility or the purchase of certain machinery and equipment, then its depreciation will always be there, and it would not be decreased or increased by your future decisions because that's already spent. And tinatapos mo na lang yung cost niya that's scattered throughout its useful life. So hindi siya differential, hindi siya relevant. So kabaliktaran naman siya with relevant cost. These are costs which are differential. Kumbaga, relevant from the name itself, relevant for decision making. Like, these are costs which are present in one alternative but not present into another alternative. And this is very important once you meet yung questions sa short-term decision making and also questions related to capital budgeting. Yeah, that's also important. Tapos si prime cost, yun naman yung direct labor plus direct materials. So yun, pag indirect material, that's overhead and that's reported as part of your conversion costs. So ayun, let me proceed. Ito, discussion question number 4. Which of the following statements is false? So ito talaga mga question na ito, kailangan mong magbasa, kailangan mo ding mag-isip. So let's identify which is false. Ito, letter A, production facility rent is part of overhead, but admin office rent is part of operating expenses. Tama naman. Pag related to production, that's inventoriable cost, but if related to overall management, so that's part of your operating expenses. So that's period cost. GAE, general and admin expenses. Next, indirect materials and factory supplies qualify as operating expenses. Actually, this is the false statement. Kasi yung dalawang ito, indirect materials and factory supplies, these are related to production. Kaya nga lang, hindi siya maklasify as whether direct materials and direct labor. So, you know, they fall as part of factory overhead. So, hindi siya operating expense, but it's an inventoriable cost. So, actually, that's the answer for number 4. But let's continue to evaluate. Ito, letter C, coconut lumber can either be a finished product or a direct material. Tama naman siya. Kasi yung coconut lumber, That could be the item that's immediately sold if nasa construction supply business ka. And that would be a direct material if, you are, for example, into a construction business. Direct material mo siya. Pero finished product siya doon sa another type of business. The concept of economics. Benta, bili. So ikaw yung nagbenta, final product mo siya. If ikaw yung bumili, yeah, that's your direct input. Tama rin yung letter D, the salary you pay to plant manager is part of overhead. So hindi siya part of your direct labor kasi nga its association to your final output is only indirect. So let's have discussion question number 5. Ito. How are materials returned to plant warehouse treated or accounted? So when does this happen? So this usually happens if napasobra lang ng withdraw ng materials papunta sa planta. So pag sinauli mo na naman siya ulit sa planta, sa inventory, raw materials inventory mo, then you add that back to your raw materials inventory. So it's not considered as outright expense. Hindi mo pa naman siya nagamit sa manufacturing, tapos hindi mo pa siya na ibenta yung final output for that. So it's not yet expense. Hindi rin siya makukonsider na losses, normal or abnormal losses, because nga, hindi naman siya nawala within the production. Letter C, it could not be marked for a debit note kasi hindi mo naman siya isinauli mismo doon sa supplier, but it will just be accounted as an addition back to your raw materials inventory. Kasi yung direction is papalik lang naman doon sa warehouse na pinagkuhanan niya. So that's letter D for number 5. So now let's continue. For number 6, ito. Cost of goods manufactured is reported as. Okay, kita mo naman doon sa inventory flow natin yung term na cost of goods manufactured. Letter A, it's reported as inventories in compliance with PAS2. What you actually manufactured for a certain period may not necessarily be part of your ending inventory. Kasi nga kung minsan na ibibenta na siya by the close of the period. So, while partially tama yung letter A, but baka may better answer pa. So, i-park muna natin si letter A. Okay. Letter B, reported as cost of goods sold as they will be sold eventually. Hindi pa. Kasi while they are envisioned to be sold eventually, we transfer from finished goods to cost of goods sold when that is actually sold. Not because you know that's gonna be sold, but only when naibenta mo na talaga. So X si letter B. Letter C, reported daw siya as cost of purchases for a merchandising business. If nasa merchandising industry ka, you will never meet the term cost of goods manufactured kasi hindi ka naman nagma-manufacture. So hindi siya cost of purchases mo. So X din siya. With letter D, cost of goods manufactured daw is a component item in the calculation of cost of goods sold. Yes, that's right. Actually, wala namang line item sa financial statements na cost of goods manufactured. So it would either be nasa finished goods mo pa siya, inventory, or kung naibenta mo na siya, nasa cost of goods sold na siya. So evaluating letter A and letter D, the better answer is letter D. So that's a component item in the calculation of your cost of goods sold. Ayan. So with number 7, eto. If the cost of goods manufactured exceeds total manufacturing cost. So ano yung nangyari? Eto. Kung babalikan mo yung T account natin, side by side si manufacturing cost and cost of goods manufactured. Pag malaki daw yung na-manufacture mo or na-finish mo versus your total manufacturing cost, ibig sabihin, yung ending inventory mo will be lower compared to your beginning inventory. Yan. So, the answer for number 7 is letter A. But if you want to verify that with numbers, then wala namang problema. Just make your assumption. But, eto na. Kailangan mo kasi mag-isip ng mas mabilis, especially when you deal with problems on calculation. Kasi kung minsan, bibigyan ka lang ng given na there was a decrease in work in process inventory or increase in your finished goods. So kailangan alert din yung isip mo. How would that impact the line item being evaluated? Would that increase or decrease? Depende din sa nature niya. So the answer for number 7 is letter A. Yan. Let's have number 8. Ito. For manufacturing costs to be reported as operating expenses, ano daw yung qualification? Let's check letter A. The product to which they are attached must be completed. Di naman lahat ng completed ay naibibenta na. So, X. Kasi, that would be part of your operating expenses once sold. So, kailangan siyang maibenta. That's the point where that's reported as cost of goods sold or cost of sales. Letter B, manufacturing costs are expense based on percentage of completion. Di naman. Di naman lahat ng tapos ay naibibenta. So, hindi din. Letter C, ito yung tama. It is when the product to which they are attached are sold. So that's letter C. Kailangan siyang maibenta. Letter D, they stay as manufacturing costs forever. Guys, wala pong forever. Lahat ay natatapos. Charot. So for number 8, that's letter C. Ito naman. Ay, sorry ha, if you think medyo mabilis ako, I just don't want to cut the momentum. Ito. Number 9, how is over-applied and under-applied overhead accounted? So, na-mention ko na kanina, it would depend if it's material or immaterial. If it's immaterial, that's directly close to cost of goods sold. But if it's material, then you have to allocate that between work in process inventory, finished goods, and cost of goods sold according to their ending balances. So, ang pinakatamang sagot for number 9 is letter C. Kasi letter A, while it's true sana, pero sabi, it's close to COGS in all cases. Hindi po sa lahat ng panahon ay kino-close natin doon. So, yun, you have to be, you have to be watchful of the choices. Kasi kung minsan, the choices are crafted to, confuse you. And kung minsan, whenever I draft the questions, I also struggle kasi kailangan ko din somehow i-confuse yung sarili ko. Because I put myself as a student na in-encounter your question. But at the end of the day, kailangan ko siyang ma-bridge. So I get to deliver the right answer despite of the confusions I made among the choices. Ayun. Next, we have our last question for theory. Ito. The manufacturing company has decided to shift from being labor-intensive to being capital-intensive. So what does it mean? Nag-reduce siya ng labor, tapos nag-invest siya into machineries. So what will be its impact to your manufacturing cost mix? So where do you charge your cost of machineries? The depreciation as well as repairs and maintenance, tapos yung fuel, electricity. So that's charged as part of your overhead. So with this kind of shift, ang mangyayari guys, magdi-decrease yung direct labor mo and magi-increase yung overhead mo. So, eto, pinakatamang sagot ay letter B. Overhead will increase with expected efficiency in materials usage. Kasi hindi ka naman mag-invest into machineries if wala siyang kaakibat na improvement as to materials efficiency and also quality improvement. So yun, yung sagot for number 10 is letter B. Letter A, that's wrong. Kasi nga, sabi ko, magdi-decrease yung direct labor mo, mag-increase yung overhead, hindi both. Letter C, that's also wrong because your depreciation will not remain stable. Tataas yung depreciation mo kasi nga mag-invest ka into machineries and equipment. Letter D, cost of capital will remain at the prevailing market rate. Actually, it's not related. It's not a related idea. It won't matter whether labor intensive ka or capital intensive. So guys, putulin ko muna yung lecture para hindi masyado mahaba yung upload. Then after this cut, please proceed to part 2 and pag-uusapan na natin yung job order costing.